Hello, and welcome to another episode of Cooking with Colbath. My name is Julie Colbath, and I am the coordinator of Civic Engagement in the Office of Student Life here at the University of Michigan-Dearborn. I do oversee the food pantry, and we are still open. It is by appointment only, and it's a little bit different hours than we were open in the summer. So we're open on Wednesdays from 2 to 6 and Thursdays from 10 to 2. You do still need to request an appointment, so if you want to make an appointment for the pantry, please email umdearbornpantry@umich.edu and we can get started. I am really excited today. A couple weeks back, we had somebody suggest that we make the chicken tortilla soup from the cafe in the UC, and I got that recipe. So it'll be great to share that with you and show y'all how to make it. So I know some of you might be missing some of the food in Picasso since the UC is closed, but I'm excited to get started. Hopefully, it is some more like fresh stuff today. So sometimes, right, like there can be some debate on what's considered a pantry staple, but I do want to share this recipe with you. Hopefully you do have like quite a bit of the stuff in your pantry. I will include, there was somebody from UUE who had suggested a really great recipe that mostly features canned goods, which we like have almost all of them at the pantry. So I'll include that one too if you don't have all of these ingredients together at the time, because this calls for heavy cream. I know heavy cream can sometimes not be something that you have in your household. I'll include that recipe as well. Maybe we can make it on another episode, but today, again, we're making the chicken tortilla soup from Picasso. So what we need, and I cut this recipe down from what they shared with me, so you can definitely, I had cut it by a quarter because it called for a gallon of chicken stock. I don't need to make that much soup, but if you want, this is really easy to double or triple if you want to do that. So the first thing that we're going to use is chicken stock. So if you watch any other episodes, you know that most of the time I don't have like jars of stock in my pantry. I have like this bouillon, so I'm going to use that. We're going to use heavy cream, which I did not get out of my fridge yet. We're going to use an onion, a red pepper, some chili powder, some cumin, some garlic. We'll actually mince it ourselves today, and some cheddar cheese. And then you can also like add salt and pepper as you like, more or less to taste, right? And then you will need, if you want to make the like fried tortilla strip topping, you'll need some oil. This is canola oil. I think my label just fell off. And you will need some tortillas. I prefer flour tortillas, but you could also use corn. And then one thing that you'll also need is cornstarch to thicken the soup, but we'll get to that when we get there. This episode is pre-recorded just as a heads up because I have to let the soup sit for an hour. And so, right, like y'all don't need to watch me watch the soup sit for an hour. So I'm going to show you how to make the first part, and then we'll let the soup sit, and then I'll join you again once we're almost ready. One thing I forgot to add is obviously it can't be chicken tortilla soup if there is no chicken. I'll be cutting up a rotisserie chicken today, which should be interesting because I haven't cut up a whole chicken in a long time. We'll be using that, but you can also use this canned chicken that we have in the pantry. I think it's super nice as a way to not have to cook, to have something on hand that you can just throw into recipes. So right, this is just chunks of chicken that you could easily add. If you are vegetarian, you could also add some black beans. I think it would be super good in there as someone who doesn't eat meat that often. So we are going to go ahead and get started. Excuse me. So the first thing that we're going to do is chop our vegetables. So let me position my camera. Cool. So first, let's go for the pepper. So I realized that we have not cut a pepper in any episode yet, I don't think. And that's mostly because, right, like, it can be hard cooking in a household with multiple different preferences. A lot of the times my boyfriend does not like peppers, so I don't always add them in. But we're going to be sneaky this time because part of what we're going to do, right, is we're going to saute these veggies, then we'll add the chicken stock and the heavy cream. And we'll let that sit for an hour, but then we're going to blend the soup. So you won't even notice that there are chunks of vegetables in here because it'll all get blended together. So when I'm cutting a pepper, what I like to do is to cut the top off. So you'll put it on your cutting board and just pop the top off just like that. Because then I can just pull out this middle part that has all the seeds. Just throwing it into my compost. And then I pull off, like, sometimes there's these extra stems. And so then I'll take the top and I'll just cut around the stem. This is the parts of the pepper that we don't want to waste. And then you can just compost this. So then you're really maximizing how much you're using. You don't have to try to like awkwardly like cut around the stem. So this is super easy. So then I can cut those pieces up. But then once I'm ready to use this, I can just cut this in half and then make strips. Okay. So since, I mean, these are kind of like weird pieces, so we are dicing today, so we want it to be, you know, little squares, so some consistency-ish in the shapes and the size. So I'm just gonna, it's kind of probably hard to tell, but like, just make some strips, right? Just some different strips, and then just kind of dice it so that we have pieces that are about the size. It doesn't like super matter because we will be blending it and it's cooking for a long time, so the vegetables will soften regardless. Right, but now I have this like little piece, so I'm just gonna cut it into like 2 strips and then just cut it into a little dice. The nice thing about red peppers, I feel like red peppers are a little bit different than other, like the yellow and the orange and the green, because they're a little bit sweeter. I think they've got a little bit of a different flavor. Alright, so the original recipe that I had cut down calls for 1 whole pepper, but again, that's like using 1 whole gallon of chicken stock. So the way that I had converted it is that it will be about 1/4 of the pepper. You can kind of eyeball it. I don't think it's going to matter too much, right? Because there's so much variation in like different sizes of peppers in the store. So I'm just going to, right, I'd cut that in half. So I'm just going to cut the half and another half to get 1/4. And I'll have a little bit extra because I use this top. So when you have the pepper, if it's easier for you, you can take, because right, the pepper curves up at the bottom. You can take and cut this bottom part so that you'll have like a very flat surface. And again, you can just kind of cut that into a few pieces. So then I normally just cut into strips, right? So just a little strip like that. So we have strips. And then I just rotate them to do some chops the other way. Great. So that should be enough pepper. I think. If you try this and you want to add more, go for it. What I'll probably end up doing, right, a lot of the times I sometimes will just like throw this in a bag and throw it in the fridge to use later, but sometimes I'll chop it all up at one time. So then when I'm prepping later in the week, I don't have to be cutting again. So we'll set our pepper aside, and then we will chop our onion. I'm going to rinse this quick. Cool, so you can peel it beforehand if you want. Sometimes I find it easier to cut off the ends first. And then peel it. Again, all your preference, that's what I find to be easier. Hopefully this onion doesn't make me cry super hard. I feel like onions have been very strong lately. Okay, so part of the point of, cutting the top and bottom off is to create a flat surface. So we're going to cut it in half. And again, this called originally for a whole onion. I'm just going to do a quarter of it because I'm making a quarter of the recipe. So similarly, right, like here's a quarter of my onion. I'm going to dice it. A fun way that I saw my sister cutting an onion the other day, because I feel like most of the time, right, so if like this was the top and this is the bottom, a lot of the times I'll cut this way, but then sometimes it's like falling all over the place. So I'm going to start by cutting like with the rings, and I think that'll be easier. But again, if you found a way that works for you, do it. I feel like lots of people try to tell you how to cut things, and sometimes you find your own way and it's easier. So it probably would have been easier if I hadn't taken this quarter away, but I did, so we're just gonna roll with it. Right, so then we're just making some cuts in the opposite direction, so that we create a nice disc. Alright, so we've got those done. And then we're going to take, the onion's starting to hit. We are going to take a clove of garlic. We're just trying to break into this garlic to actually get a clove out. Right. So a lot of the times, right, this still has its peel on it. I'm going to cut the bottom off and the top off, because again, that helps me actually be able to peel the garlic. Right. And so I think like we've talked about before, I normally like take my knife, right? This is the way that you would cut, and I turn it this way to press down on the garlic. That helps so it's just not rolling around, right? And then to mince, you do like some very quick chops one way, then you kind of like move it around and just, you don't want to bite into like a huge piece of garlic. I mean, I love garlic, but it's not always fun getting a big bite. Alright, so we've minced our garlic. So what we're going to do next is turn on our pot. And I have like that's a fun glare. Sorry about that. I have like a medium to large-ish pot. I'm gonna grab my olive oil. So I just want to start to get that warm, and then add, this calls for about like a teaspoon. I normally, as I'm sure you've probably noticed if you've watched any other episodes, drizzle it in, and I don't measure. So I'm gonna let that heat up for one quick second, and while that is happening, I'm gonna grab my heavy cream so that when we're ready to add it, we can add it in. So you might get confused at the store. Calls for heavy cream. Sometimes things just say heavy cream. Sometimes they say heavy whipping cream. Basically the same thing. So I'm gonna add my veggies into my pot. When I do it, so this is the like sharp side of the knife. I'm gonna use the opposite side to scoot the veggies into the pan so that I'm not dulling my blade. Woo! Cool. So we are going to stir these around. We added all of them at the same time. If the oil spits a lot, turn your heat down. It's not fun getting splashed by hot oil. So we are going to more or less saute these for a few minutes until they get slightly softened. They smell so good. I love the smell of like sauteing onions, sauteing pepper, sauteing garlic. So good. Okay, once this is done, we're gonna add our stock, add our cream, add our chili powder, our cumin, and salt and pepper to taste. And then we're just gonna, that's when we will take a small break because we'll just bring it up to a simmer and then just let it sit for an hour. So this seems like a pretty simple thing, but right, like it won't take, like it's not like it'll be done in 30 minutes. So it's always good to read recipes beforehand so you kind of get a gist of how long it's going to take you, what steps you need to take, just so that you're not surprised and then you're like, oh shoot, like this won't be done in time. Okay, I am going to grab a couple measuring spoons. And you can kind of tell, you could easily poke it with a fork to see how soft these end up getting, but onions, when they start to like heat up and when they start to soften, they get a little bit more translucent, so you can always look for that too. And again, you do want to like saute these, don't get me wrong, but we will be blending them and they will be, you know, like sitting in the liquid for a while, so they will cook and like get softened. So if you're like, I don't know how long to saute them for, at least just do it for a few minutes. This is when I feel like a little like head camera would be helpful, so then you could see into the pan, because I feel like when I try to show you and my camera doesn't always work well. But let me try to grab some on my spoon and show you how they're changing. You might not be able to see, and it probably actually doesn't look very different. Right, but the onions are starting to get a little bit more translucent, so you can see a little bit more through them. And you don't have to like stir this all the time. You can like let it sit for a couple minutes and then come back to it. Sometimes I forget about things on the stove. Not that I forget, right? But I get busy doing something else, and so then they get a little bit browned. Not a big deal if that happens, but Alright, they're looking good, so we're going to add our next ingredients. So, chicken stock. So we're adding a quart of chicken stock, which is 4 cups. So this is my water because I'm going to add in my bouillon mix. I'm going to turn this down. If I add the water immediately, it's just going to oil is going to splash everywhere. So I'm going to turn the heat down and then I'm going to add in my water. Again, if you have chicken stock in a can, or 4 cups is those larger containers, you know, those square ones, quart. You can also add that. So since I put in 4 cups, for these it's a teaspoon to each cup, so I'm going to add 4 teaspoons. Okay. And if you're using bouillon cubes, right, you just add I think it's probably 1 cube per cup similarly. Great. So we added the chicken stock, we're going to add the heavy cream. So I'm going to measure out 1 cup, and this is part of what makes it creamy. There isn't, surprisingly, from my perspective, if you've seen other episodes, you know how much I like cheese. There isn't a ton of cheese in here, but you could obviously add more to top it with. So I'm just measuring out a cup, as I'm sure you've probably learned in any science class. You just want to make sure you level your eye line to see what the measurement actually is on a liquid measuring cup. I think they call it the meniscus. Is that right? Okay, so a cup of cream. So this will make it nice and creamy. Okay, that's not the. Try to put the lid on the measuring cup, which does not make any sense. Cool. So we added our stock, we added our cream. We're going to add our chili powder. So we'll add 1 tablespoon. And then we'll add our cumin. So that calls for a 1/4 tablespoon. It's kind of a strange measurement, but you can make it work. My cumin's not very full, so it's hard to get it. So this is a 1/2 tablespoon. So then I'm just going to eyeball what 1/4 of a tablespoon would be. And I'm going to add that in. And then I'm going to sprinkle in some salt and pepper. Again, you can season it to you can season it later, more so at the end, to make sure that you don't over season. I'm just going to sprinkle some in. Some salt. Some pepper. And I mixed it, and it's looking real creamy. So I can grab my computer in a second and show you what it looks like. It's looking pretty good, I guess. To be honest, I've only eaten this in the cafe once before because I started this position in January, and by March we were working from home. So we are going to just let that simmer for an hour. So I'll be back in probably about 45 minutes so that we can work on a couple other things before we start. So I'll just put, you know, a little interim, but then I'll just pick right back up. So be back right in a second. Cool. And we are back, like nothing ever even happened. So I brought my soup to simmer. I let it simmer for about an hour. And I just turned it off for a few minutes because we are going to be putting it in the blender. So I just kind of want it to cool for a second so the blender doesn't get like overwhelmed, and my blender is plastic, and so I don't want it to be like too hot and it just get weird. So while we let that cool for a couple minutes, we're gonna do a couple things. So the first thing we're gonna do, because then this is less cleanup for me on the way to making our food, is we are going to cut our tortillas into strips so that we fry them, and then we'll work on cutting our chicken. So I think the recipe calls for 2 6-inch tortillas. I'm not exactly sure how big these are, but I'm just going to use 2. You could use more if you want more to top it. If you don't want to top it, or if you have like fried strips already, you could always like sprinkle some tortilla chips or something on there. So we're going to cut these into 1-inch thick strips. So I'm going to cut them in half. So just right down the middle, and then I'm just going to make strips out of this. I feel like that'll be a good size. Right, it's up to you as to how long you want the strips to be, but I feel like, you know, if they're about this size, they'll be good. So we're just going to make some strips that will end up frying in some oil. So right, like I think this is probably like the size that I've seen sometimes. Sometimes they're a little bit smaller, but I think I don't always love frying things, so I think it's easier if it's a little bit bigger. That's less I have to fry, and they're easier to get out. So I'm going to do the same thing with my other half. I could have combined them, I guess. Alright, then I'm just going to set them in this bowl until we are ready to fry. So now I'm going to grab my chicken. So I had gotten a rotisserie chicken yesterday when I was at Meijer. So hopefully this isn't a crazy experience. It is cold, which I don't know if it'll impact the cutting or not, so we'll see. So it looked like the way that people normally cut these is to, you know, make a cut right here to get to the leg. Ultimately, I want to get to the breast meat. I'm not a huge like dark meat person, so I really want to get to the white meat. So we're gonna do that on the other side, where we just made a cut into right like around the leg, and then we're easily able to just pull that off. So I'm gonna set those aside. We can use that meat anywhere else. The nice thing, right, like I did one time take a class that was all about how to like cook a chicken. It can be a super great deal if you buy a chicken and you're able to use all the parts, right? It just is a little bit more involved of a process. So then I think we're just gonna kind of cut into right near the breastbone so that we can really get some good white meat. Yummy! I don't know, I'm weird about meats, and so I prefer white meat over dark meat. So we can just grab some of this. And so the recipe has like a, if you are using canned chicken, I would start off with 1 can. It kind of depends on how much you want in there, right? You can kind of add as much as you want, which is the nice thing about cooking, is when you really feel like there's an autonomy in there. So it's a lot of extra meat on here that I'm not going to handle at the moment, but right, like you could easily buy this chicken and make a lot of things with it. So I'm going to put some of this back in my little container to use later. So then this is like a little bit of like the fat that has congealed in the fridge, which is fine. Fat is flavor. So I'm just gonna cut this into, pieces. I'm gonna cut them into like bite-sized pieces that I would want to find in my soup. So I don't really want pieces that are too big, but we will see how far this gets us. So like I said, you can add as much or as little as you want. I think this would also, right, only eating it once, but thinking about the base of it, I think it would be good if you added like some corn and some black beans, but sometimes I get a little bit too crazy and then want to add too many things. So we're just going to cut this other one. See, we found a little bone in there, so just be careful. If you find any bones, make sure to take them out, because you definitely don't want to cut or bite into that. Would not be pleasant. Alright, cool. I think that should be enough for me, because I think at least some of it's hard to tell with my pot, some of the soup, I think, like, right, if you're boiling something for a long time, the water is going to be evaporating. So it does seem like there's a little bit less liquid than we started with. So that's all I need to cut. I'm going to scoot this away and rinse my hands off. Okay, so we are going to, and this is crazy lighting. Sorry, I got new lights. I need to move them around. But we're going to blend our soup. So it probably doesn't look much different than what it did an hour ago. You can see a little bit more of the color, I think, right as it cooks, and the red bell peppers are sort of, breaking down to some degree. The color is sort of releasing. So like I said, I turned this off for a little bit. You can also, if you have an emulsion blender, you can use that. So right, like those are those handheld blenders that you're able to, like, they might be battery operated, or they might plug in. I don't know. I don't have one. So you're able to like emulsify the stuff so everything's the same consistency. But we're just gonna throw it in my blender. So we're gonna scoot over here. Hopefully you can hear me. Again, sorry about sound quality. I try to be in direct way of the computer. It doesn't always work that well. So I'm going to grab my pot and we're going to pour it into my blender. Again, this is real hot. So when you are blending, if you have the capability to have like a little bit of venting, I would definitely do that. Right, because it's hot, and while it's moving around, right, that's continuing to release heat. And so, it needs somewhere to escape. Otherwise, you could potentially run the risk of, like your blender cracking or something like that. So the top of my blender has this little opening, so I'm going to leave that slightly open so that some heat can release. Okay, and then everybody's blenders is different. I'm planning, this is my like Ninja So I'm planning to put it on the puree function. Ultimately, we just want it to, you know, smooth out, blend together, have one consistency. So sorry for the noise that's about to happen. So I don't like blending things for a long time if I don't have to because I don't love the noise. I'm gonna check and see if it's like mixed together, if we need to run it for longer. You could also use a food processor if it will fit in there. I think that works pretty similarly. So that's pretty smooth to me. Take it off and we're going to put it back in our pan. So I'm just going to take out the blade. So that's something that I don't have to worry about. So we'll pour it back in to our pot. And you can see there are no chunks. So I'm going to add the chicken now. I'm going to turn this back on. I'm going to add the chicken now. And I'm going to kind of let it sit in there for a few minutes while it gets some like flavor and warms up since I had it in the fridge. Alright, cool. And this is really thin at this point, so that's where this cornstarch slurry comes in. So the slurry is basically water and cornstarch. And I think by like adding the water and the cornstarch instead of just like dumping the cornstarch right in, is it helps it to get a little bit more like consistency and less clumping like in your actual dish. So we'll make that in a second, but I'm gonna start heating some oil so we can quickly at least fry some of our tortilla strips. Alright, so I don't love frying things because I feel like the oil splatters everywhere, which is not my favorite. So if you have any tips, feel free to let me know. But ultimately, I was trying to see how you can tell if your oil is hot enough without a thermometer, right? Because the only thermometer I have is a meat thermometer, which I use probably for things I may not like need to or shouldn't be using it for. But this only goes to 220, and I'm just gonna throw it on the floor. And your oil needs to be at like 360 or 375. So I'm gonna just pour in enough oil to kind of create like a layer on the bottom plus a little bit. So I think that they generally say you should do it about like half an inch up the pan. So it'll feel like a lot of oil, but tis the season for frying. So we're gonna let that heat up for a few minutes. I did look at a few different tricks to see when it's hot enough. One of them is using the end of like a wood handle, the end of a wooden spoon. So we can try that. We can also, sorry, I'm trying to find my popcorn. There's also a trick that like if you throw a kernel of popcorn in there, then you can see when it like, once it pops, it should be at about like 360 or something. So I'm gonna take, I just have a bag of popcorn and take one kernel and we'll throw it in here and see what happens. Boop. Alright. While that's heating up, we will make our cornstarch slurry. So it calls for like a 50-50 mix of cornstarch and water. So I'm just going to use 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. And I'm going to put 1 tablespoon of cold water in here. Okay, and then I'm just going to use my whisk. You could also use a fork. Whew. And just try to like mix it together so there aren't really many clumps of the cornstarch. So one thing, right after this is over, at 5 o'clock, we will be having drop-in hours to celebrate National Voter Registration Day, which is today. So the election is 6 weeks away. So make sure you're registered. If you think you're registered, double check. It's super easy, right? And you can even re-register. It takes less than 2 minutes, especially if you've moved, right? You're at a new address, anything like that. You should register, you should get your friends to register, and if you have any questions about registering or need help or have just questions about voting in general, we do have some like low-key drop-in hours from 5 to 7 today, just to be able to answer any of your questions, and if anyone who drops in will be entered to win a gift card. So get your questions answered, maybe get a gift card. Super cool. Alright, so I'm going to turn this down. We can try, I don't want this too hot because, again, I don't want it splattering everywhere. We can try to see if the wooden stick trick works. I think the idea, right, and I don't know how it works, but like if you stick the bottom of a wooden spoon, I don't have a wooden spoon, but I have a spatula with a wooden handle. If it bubbles like constantly, then it's at the right temperature. If it doesn't bubble, then it's not hot enough. And if it bubbles like crazy, then it's too hot. So we'll just stick it in and see what happens. It's not really bubbling much at all. So not hot enough. Our kernel of popcorn also has not popped. So as we take these strips off, just so you're prepared, I have a plate with some paper towel. So we're going to place those fried strips on the paper towel just to help absorb some of the oil. To be honest, I'm not sure, like, if you do fry these strips, how long they'll stay sort of crispy. So you might, if you're making a huge batch of this and you wanted to eat it over the span of multiple days, you might want to refry some strips. So just be aware. I think I am, while we're waiting for that to heat up, I'm going to try to start adding some of this cornstarch mixture pretty slowly. So again, 1 tablespoon of cornstarch and 1 tablespoon of cold water. And what we want to do is add it pretty slowly and then like give it a minute or two to really like cook through, because we don't want to get it too thick unless that's the consistency that you would like it to be at. So I'm just going to try to pour a little bit of this in here. And then I'm going to mix it around. It's already sort of like boiling a little bit, so I'm going to let it boil for a couple minutes and stir it and see if it's getting like thicker, because you can always add more, but it gets a little bit trickier when you've added too much. The oil's starting to make some noises. And again, like if you, this is pretty thin as it is, right? But if you are like cool with thin soups, you don't have to thicken it if you don't want to. Oh, there's a string on my shirt. Just a reminder, as this is airing, there should be a live chat. Feel free to ask questions or share recipes. After the fact, feel free to comment, you know, relevant comments. I'm happy to respond to, or, you know, use some of your suggestions in future episodes. Let's try our spoon in the oil again, see what happens. Starting to bubble around there a little bit more. But we'll really know when our popcorn pops, and hopefully it doesn't pop on me. That's my one dream at the moment. Alright, so this is boiling a little bit more. I don't feel like it's thickened as much as I want it to. So I'm going to go ahead. And every time you're like about to add this, make sure you sort of stir it around again. Because the cornstarch can like settle. So I'm going to add the rest of this. It's always hard to know how much is going to be enough versus too much. So if you want to like make a big batch of it so you don't have to do it multiple times, feel free. So I'm going to stir that around to make sure that it's mixing again, and then once it starts to like boil a little bit more, then hopefully it'll thicken a little bit too. I feel like it's starting to get, well, I'm gonna throw, ooh, the kernel's changing color. I feel like it's getting close to popping, y'all. I am a little bit scared, I'm gonna be honest with you. Because then, right, like once this is thickened to the consistency you would like, and we fry these, we'll be all done, right? So I think, you know, it is like a longer process, but it's not actually that involved. So hopefully you try it out, and it gives you a little bit of comfort of campus without being able to go there. Ah! It worked! That's crazy! What once was a kernel is now a popped kernel. So I think it's probably hot enough I'm going to throw this in the sink to add on strips. Let's see what happens. Alright. I don't want to just dump them in there, right? They need space. So I'm going to put in a few at a time. I'm going to stand away so I don't get splashed. They're just kind of, I don't know if you can see them. They're floating around. I'm going to set the timer for about 30 seconds, and I'm going to flip them. That's exciting. I tried to fry something once, like a couple months ago, and it was a disaster. So I'm excited that it might work. And I haven't gotten splashed yet. Even better. If you want them crispier, I'm sure you could fry them longer. I'm just going to see what happens. Trying to read a few different recipes online to know what to do. Alright, so 30 seconds. I'm going to try to flip them over. Alright, we'll put them for 30 more seconds. And then I'm going to take the camera over and show you. Oh! Y'all have no idea. Frying scares me a bit, so I'm excited to be doing it with you. Right. This has gotten a little bit thicker. I don't want it too thick, so I'm just going to turn the soup off. And then I'm going to take my tortilla strips and put them on my paper towel lined plate. It's not called paper. Right, because as you might be able to see, I don't know if this handle's in the way, but like it's dripping quite a bit of oil when I pick it up. So you don't want a ton of extra oil. Cool, and then I'm just gonna do it in batches, right? So now we have some crispy strips. So thank you so much for joining. I hope that you try this at home and let me know how it goes. We hope to see you at the drop-in hours. Again, drop in anytime between 5 and 7, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Thanks, y'all.